Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for another founder-led sales stories, where founders who have successfully navigated their founder-led selling journey share with those who are still in the middle of it. I'm Pete Kazanji, author of Founding Sales, the Startup Sales Handbook, and your host. Today we have Matt Pasternack, CEO of Once, which upskills school district staff to deliver one-on-one reading tutoring to kindergartners. Matt has scaled Once to over $2 million in ARR with six-figure deals and just a three-person sales team, all while navigating the notoriously complex education tech landscape. Matt is particularly interesting because he was previously a sales leader at Clever, which was acquired in a substantial outcome, but had to completely rethink his sales approach when selling to academic officers rather than IT departments. My biggest takeaway from our conversation were Matt's brilliant research partnership strategy to create compelling events in a noisy market, his counterintuitive focus on only the top 500 districts when he realized that all sales required equal effort, and his insights on importing trust through strategic sales hiring when subject matter expertise alone isn't enough to get in the door. If you're selling into relationship-driven markets with long sales cycles, you're going to find Matt's journey particularly valuable. So with that, here's Matt. Hey folks, thanks for joining us for another founder-led sales stories. I'm here with someone I'm very excited to talk with today. Matt Pasternack has a phenomenal background for teaching all of us about founder-led sales, specifically in the EdTech space. Matt has a particularly interesting background insofar as he was previously a sales leader, but he was a sales leader having previously been a founder and doing founder-led sales himself. He also has deep expertise in the subject matter that his current company Once is working on. Early childhood literacy, teaching, etc. So all this is to say that if you are interested in enhancing your EdTech go-to-market, Matt is going to be a phenomenal resource for us here today, and I'm really excited to have him share. So Matt, thanks for joining us.
Happy to be here. Great to see you, Pete.
Wonderful. So for folks who aren't familiar with Once, and that might be probably if some teachers have stumbled upon us, perhaps they would be familiar with it. But for folks who are not familiar, maybe you can tell us a little bit about what the problem is that Once tackles, for what organization type, and then who are the people at those orgs who really care about that, which of course will characterize to us all like what your ICP is and who the personas are that you guys address.
Sure. No, great question. So the challenge that we focused on is reading. And if you talk to, school district superintendents across the country, reading or lack of reading proficiency is going to be, their or students' lack of reading proficiency. They're usually proficient readers. Is
We
going to
hope.
be, yeah, is generally a number one or number two problem. And the reason it's that way is just that the ability to read unlocks the ability to learn autonomously. So, if you can't, if you're a fifth grader, a seventh grader, eighth grader, you can't read, like you have to pay perfect attention in class, right? You can't miss a thing the teacher says because you can't read. Like you have no other way to
Can
acquire
catch back
knowledge.
up again.
So if you space out, whatever, is not happening. If you can read, you can learn. You can follow subjects that are interesting to you. You can learn independently, and so it's just been chronicled over and over again. Reading well below grade level, just they're just completely capped academically and in many cases in life outcomes. So that's the problem. What we do specifically is we upskill entry level school support staff. These are folks with titles like aides or paras or teaching assistants to provide one-on-one reading tutoring instruction each day in person to primarily kindergartners and in some cases first graders. And the reason this is compelling to school district leaders and school leaders is a lot of times these staff members, like they have them in the school, but it's highly variable what they're actually doing.
I
So
see.
if you talk to CAO of a school district and you say, how many paras do you have or aides? They might have a number. And if you say, what are they actually
What are you
doing?
using them
Like,
for?
exactly. It'll be just anything. So in a well-functioning classroom, they're leading small groups and working with kids and reading and doing, all these wonderful things. And other places, they're literally stapling papers and putting up bulletin boards. And, it's like, is that the best use of the scarce talent in the school district? And we provide a way to sort of like mechanize that
Upskill them.
that
Yeah.
approach exactly, and just have predictable outcomes.
Got it.
From
And you mentioned I think the CAO, is that the Chief
Mhm.
Academic
Chief
Officer?
academic, yeah, yeah, chief
Yeah.
academic.
And so I presumably that's the person who cares about this problem and as a result would care about once.
Yes, yes. At the district level, the chief academic officer. At the school level, will be the principal. Who's ultimately, in both cases, responsible for the student outcomes.
Interesting. And so are you guys able to sell to either of those? Like can you sell, can you presumably you can sell a whole district? Can you also sell a single school?
Yes, we can sell to both. And in the beginning, we were sort of more likely to sell to individual principals. The problem with selling to principals, I'll say, when we first got started, I wanted to see, is this a real thing, right? Like, can we stand out from the noise? Like just a little bit of kind of channel testing. And so I just bought a list of principal emails and, emailed every principal in America and just, kind of put a subject line of, kindergarten one-on-one reading tutoring, and until email deliverability stopped the emails from being delivered, the open rate was really, really high. And so I think the beginning was like a 50% open rate. And that was like, these are principals who generally don't open emails. And so that said, hey, there's something here. The people who are responsible for, kids learning, like, are interested in this approach to solving this problem. But then you kind of peel back a layer of the onion and you discover, principal, great, like let's set up a pilot, let's get started. And it's like, well, I need, sign off from my chief academic officer that
I see.
this is aligned to our overall curriculum. I need sign off from our HR people that our, paras or, specialists can engage in this kind of work. I need sign off from, this team. It's like by the time you get all these sign offs for a single principal, it's like you've done an enterprise sale. Exactly. You've done enterprise sale for, for a pretty small opportunity. And so we quickly realized, no, these are district sales. Like there's a level of complexity here that's a district sale.
And so, and then those district sales, those are the ones that are the high five-figure, six-figure average selling price. And so that's like the current kind of like transaction size, more or less.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Even at a single school level, we'll be, sort of low to mid five figure, and the district size will be, mid six figure. So, these are they're pretty large commitments. In education, we often think if you're on the outside of education, you think, oh, well, school districts exist to just kind of optimize the dollars, spent on helping kids learn. In reality, school districts are a workforce composed of tons of adults, and school districts are really interested in educating and upskilling their adults who can then educate and upskill children. And so we have a kind of strong, in some ways we're kind of like service as a product type offering, at least we are today. And so school districts, they really want to pay to develop their staff, and those become pretty big contracts.
That's interesting because I would imagine, I'm sure we'll talk about this a little bit more, but like on the one hand, there's a lot of ed tech software out there that is focused on, the individual students, what have you. Like, Matt, you'll get a kick out of this. My son uses Clever all the time. Every time he logs into Clever with a QR code, I think of you. Um,
I appreciate that.
for folks that are listening, Matt was an early sales leader at Clever, which eventually was acquired in a fairly substantial outcome. So he's been around the block when it comes to ed tech stuff. But the point is that there's a whole constellation of software that is kid facing,
Yes.
but once is kind of adult facing with the purpose of course, improving kid behavior. So on the one hand, it's probably it's less crowded. On the other hand, it's a kind of like one step removed. It's like a little bit of like a Rube Goldberg machine there, where we're like, we're going to get this person to be more successful, and as a result, that's going to get these folks to be successful here. So I imagine that has kind of implications there. So when it comes to uh, your current size of the sales organization, how big is that?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're very small. We're very small today. I focus on sales, and we've got two other folks in the team who focus on sales. So there's three of us.
And you guys are like north of a couple $1 million of ARR.
Exactly. Yep.
Nice. And then maybe you can tell everyone a little bit about like your background because you're a little bit of a unicorn insofar as you're a founder who used to be a seller, but previous to that, you were a founder. Maybe you can help folks kind of understand kind of what you bring to the table.
Yeah. No, certainly. I mean, I after college, I started off as a teacher, middle school English teacher in New York City, and then at the time, sort of a lot of the interesting, I thought a lot of the kind of interesting work in education school districts was really around kind of human capital and kind of labor law. And so I went to law school looking to sink my teeth into that. But then I ended up doing an internship back in New York City where I taught at a project that was called School of One, and it was basically trying to deliver a like fully personalized learning experience to every child in the classroom. This is very early days, before
Pre
two.
large language model.
Yes,
Very,
yes, yes.
very,
No,
very ambitious.
this is pre 2010, and the architecture of this system was sort of described as like almost like an airport terminal. It was very unusual, but it was very compelling in its own way. And uh, the chancellor of the New York City schools, he's responsible for 1 million students, and does press conferences about various topics. He ended up doing many press conferences that summer on this particular pilot project. And usually press conferences were very hostile. Why are you firing these people or doing all these bad things? And in this case, the press questions were, when can we tell our viewers this will be live in every single school in the city? And it was just this moment because in a certain sense, the personalization of learning was really designed to kind of solve this human capital problem, which is that I have one teacher serving 30 kids. Like, how can I ever scale excellence in that system? But that's not how the media and sort of the viewers saw it. They saw, no, every kid needs to learn what they need to learn. They need sort of a personalized journey. And so it just sort of hit me on the head at that moment that the future of education innovation is not going to be in kind of labor contracts. It's going to be in a hybrid of technology and space and people and all these things coming together. We were super early. I then went on to start a couple very small startups in education, which didn't thrive, but I understood a specific problem from them about the technical challenges of just rostering students into software. And so when Clever got started, I read there was like it was still in YC and like had the little YC article in TechCrunch about what they were doing, and I was like, oh my gosh, this
Oh
is
my
the problem
gosh,
that has
I
to
know
be solved.
exactly how big of a problem this is.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so it was really fun. So I had 6 wonderful years at Clever.
So, I mean, in addition to like already being a subject matter expert, and by the way, folks, when Matt says that out of school he was a teacher, Matt did Teach for America, which is a hidden source of very strong talent. So hiring TFA folks, fresh out of TFA, usually they have been in inner, not always, but like oftentimes they've been in inner city schools, so like they can definitely take a punch, so to speak. They can be for like really great, they're like great SDR candidates, great kind of like early CS candidates, really good communicators, really good management, like classroom management. Because like if you're managing a classroom of like 20 or 30 kind of like wild and crazy kids, then managing a call of three stakeholders or customers or whatever can be that's a piece of cake on a comparative basis there. So tip for folks is that if you see TFA on somebody's LinkedIn profile, it's usually a pretty good signifier. So obviously you had a lot of experience here around kind of like the initial product hypothesis and the fact that like reading was so problematic, but like, we have to validate these things and make sure that other people view that that's the case too, and not just view that it's a problem, but also are willing to spend money on it in the short term, and then also validate that they think that the way that you're tackling it can be a meaningful approach, especially in your case where it was a human capital approach as opposed to like a pure software approach. Um, how did you go about validating?
Yeah, it's a good question. So initially, it wasn't actually even planning to be in schools, because one thing at Clever, our customer, we were a market, sort of a two-sided marketplace, and so we had schools and districts on one side, we had education vendors on the other side, and the successful education vendors are quite successful and have really strong businesses and very strong customer relationships, and it's like a great place to be. The fledgling startup kind of education entrepreneurs, it is one of the most challenging environments to sell into. And when you sort of walk the halls of conferences, there'd be a lot of sad looks often. So I was not initially looking to sell the K-12 districts, even though I knew there was a huge pain point there. Initially, our hypothesis was if we can train any adult to teach kids to read, just knock it out in preschool and basically sell through preschools. And so you'd essentially kind of like have a person in a preschool who's doing this, and the preschool would advertise to the parents would pay, and the whole thing would kind of operate inside of these preschools.
Kind of like more like a Wonder School go to market where
Yeah,
like because I'm thinking back at a buddy who ran inside sales at Wonder School, and I think that they're pretty much the dominant like attendance kind of like ERP solution
mhm,
for these little like preschools, daycares, call it what you will,
yeah,
etc. So the hypothesis was before we get into public school where it's predominantly where the students go post preschool, post daycare, kind of get in front of it there.
yeah.
Okay, so what
And
disabused you of that notion?
totally. And I mean the things you can avoid in that model, right? You don't need to sell the chief academic officers. You don't need curriculum alignment. You don't need any of that. You just basically say, hey, parents, I can help your child learn to read before they even start kindergarten. And that's a pretty compelling idea. And so the first step in validating that is you just need to call a ton of preschools, right? And just see what the response is. And so I got a list, and I did ones sort of local to me. So if I got a hit, I could drive out and meet them, and it was it was wild. I mean, you would call, and the person who was running the preschool, one of their employees is off that day, and so they're now working with a whole room of kids, and so like you could not reach these folks. You would call, the phone would just ring and ring and ring, like it felt impossible to get through. And then there were certainly some that I made it through to, and then I'd go out and visit, and we'd meet and talk, and it was just like the process was getting so attenuated for what was then ultimately still going to be a sell through to parents. I mean, it was just, yeah, like this was not, this was not going to be a scalable model. And so, at that moment, it was, look, obviously selling to K-12 is hard, but I do have some subject matter expertise, and let's bite the bullet and do it. And it might not be as hard as selling to preschools. So, you know,
Got it. And I think a good kind of remark there regarding what you just noted is that ultimately the purpose of a sales motion is to figure out the highest commercial intensity crossed with the lowest level of effort path to service a need,
yeah,
right? I was teaching a class at HBS recently where one of the students was asking about the difference between consumer and business. And ultimately, I think that the thing to remember is that utility for the most part is derived by the end user, is created at the end user level. And then the question is, who could pay for that? Are you going to go straight to the end users? Are you going to go to some sort of bundle of the end users? Are you going to go to a bundle of end users and then someone else pays for it? Are you going to go to a bundle, like a big bundle of end users? And then, you know, and so and where direct sales comes in is when you are addressing a large bundle
yeah,
of end users.
yeah,
And as a result, there needs to be human communication and negotiation and understanding and education and so on and so forth that requires a person, a seller, to do that, to understand the landscape, to communicate to multiple people, as compared to someone walking into a liquor store and like buying a bottle of Gatorade, right? Which of course does not need an individual seller to kind of convince folks there. Okay, so so that
and
so
then if I could add one more sort of dynamic to that 2x2, I think there's also I mean, I think that yes, the long run goal, of course, is to offer, so the highest commercial value at, the in the most efficient way. I think that, your sort of classic kind of disruptive innovations are textbook examples of doing that. And so, I mean, when we were at Clever, like, there was this, roster, like a provisioning user accounts, essentially. It was this massive problem, and it was particular to this environment of K-12 because, you had kindergartners who can't read, and you're supposed to remember, 5 different usernames and passwords. They can't type either. And it was just like bananas, like on the surface, right?
Amazing.
And so
Yeah,
you come
QR
in.
codes.
Exactly, right. And so, we got to QR codes and we solved that problem, but it was a very discrete problem. There weren't clear solutions. The way we solved it was, a little complex because of the two-sided marketplace, but it, like, in a certain sense, kind of sold itself, and that was product-led growth. And so very quickly you get to, an efficient sale with, with reasonably high commercial value. I think that, you know, in kind of harder areas, whether it's because it is, sort of a more established market, like reading solutions, folks have been working on this for decades and decades, or whether, you're just building something just like something to solve a really complex problem. I don't know that you can always choose both of those at the same time. So you think kind of, can I get high commercial value and sales efficiency day one? In certain products you can, and like that's cool. But then you can also recognize other times, like, you know, in the long run, that's what I want. In the short run, we're going to have a lot of sales inefficiency to deliver something with high commercial value, and then over time, we're going to tune the sales efficiency, and along with sort of the market demand to where we want to get to.
I think there's two things there. Some problems only exist in organizations that have lots of stakeholders. So my quintessential example of this is Workday, HRIS software. There is no product-led growth Workday at the enterprise level, right? Because, if you have a hypothesis that you're going to solve the problem of HRIS, which is, you know, uh, tracking your employees, paying them, onboarding them, you know, managing them, et cetera, for a 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000 person company, you're going to talk to a lot of people, right? And then similarly, even if you think that you may eventually be serving a problem or solving a problem that doesn't necessarily require a ton of people to engage with early on, and that may be the end state, right? And then you may eventually get to a more efficient motion where it might be self-serve, or it might be like a one-call close, or it might be inbound, or what have you. Early on, you can paper over a lot of this, like a lot of inefficiency, or sorry, a lot of product friction, if you will, with magical human words, right? Listening and then speaking to people. So it's like the YC do things that don't scale. You can do things that don't scale in a sales capacity. Sorry, you can and ought do things that don't scale from a sales capacity early on in order to validate that there is a non-zero ability. There's an existence proof of go-to-market here. And then later on, we can start forming hypotheses around how we can make that either more commercially intensive or less laborious on our way to do it. So on that topic, maybe you can tell us about who your first customer was and how you went about closing them.
Sure. Yeah. Our first customers were relatively easy to acquire, which, gave me kind of early confidence that, hey, like there's something here. But
Oh,
that's no, right. Yeah. No, that it doesn't mean it was scalable in any sense. It was just, it was like an n of, n of a couple. But basically, I had a friend who she was starting a separate reading company, it turned out, but she introduced me to her first pilot customer, and they were thrilled to kind of layer this in and try this. And so it was, just a kind of a transfer of a relationship into, what ended up being a really successful pilot. But, that was that one.
so like the notion of having someone who has a neighboring solution that is probably not competitive, but interestingly, probably competes for a budget, maybe. that where you see something that's potentially complementary, and then using that as is almost like a kind of lightweight referral partner
Yeah.
early on.
Yeah, or yeah, and I'd say even more broadly, just sort of using your existing network, right? I mean, if you're going to sell into some industry and if you don't know a single person in that industry, like it's going to feel a little bit more uphill than if you know a couple people you can pick up the phone and call and kind of start, with your network. And then our first, large district partner came, sort of through one of my, network from a co-founder. So, sort of similar thing where it's like, look, I trust this person, and therefore I will, try this new thing,
Yeah,
even if I don't fully understand the new thing.
and I think that that can be a very powerful thing when you have the subject matter expertise, or you're selling into a silly like my most recent company, Atrium. We do sales performance management software, sales analytics software. Know a lot of salespeople. I'm sorry, I know a lot of sales leaders. Pardon. And I knew that through Modern Sales Pros and a variety of other things, and also my book, Founding Sales, et cetera. And so that can be very, very powerful. Now, I think the important thing to kind of caveat here is these need to be people who are in your network that have the problem, or at least you have a
Yes.
hypothesis that
Yes.
they have the problem that you solve. Because I think one of the problems that can founders can end up kind of spinning their wheels a lot on is selling to people or engaging folks that don't have the problem. I mean, that would probably be pretty egregious. But maybe just kind of have like the problem or a hypothesis of the problem at a secondary or tertiary level versus very intensely having the problem. And so I think the important thing there is at least having a credible hypothesis that they have the problem that it is that you're solving, or ideally, and of course then you validate in discovery that what level of priority that is. And I mean, I think you're an interesting cat here insofar as Clever. You guys did a bunch of sales at or scaled substantially at Clever, and um, you know, to many, many, many millions of dollars of ARR, had a fairly substantial sales organization there. Founder-led sales is a little different than managing, multiple salespeople and kind of running a sales organization. So when you think about the resources that were most helpful to you in your own kind of, restart your founder-led sales journey, what were most helpful for you, would you say?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'd say, I think I mean, the first resource, that I relied on, I think most people would, is just your experience. And so you're absolutely right. Sort of at Clever, had gone through this motion. What was interesting though, and I knew this going in, but at Clever, we were selling to district IT. And district IT is a very different buyer from sort of the district curriculum or academic side. And so district IT is just more of a standard SaaS sale, right? It's like you have this problem, we've got this
Yeah.
answer. Oh, we've got
Wow.
it in a way that's free, and one thing leads to another, and we can scale very, very quickly. Whereas in academics, the pace is just, sort of 1/10 because they're just very focused on, well, is it aligned to what we're already doing, and how are we already using resources? And it's hard to, on the academic side, sort of the concept of ROI just looks totally different. And so in some ways, although I had experience, we sold into, I don't know, Clever was in, upwards of 95% of the top 100 districts. I mean, we
That's
had sort
right.
of done all the big sales there were to do, but in this
For
in this new role,
the IT people, not for the
right?
chief academic officer.
Exactly,
And maybe those
exactly.
folks don't talk, or maybe they hate each other. Like, who knows?
Totally. No, I mean, there were times at Clever we tried to sell product to chief, sort of upsell additional product to chief academic officers. And it was like, if your CTO or CIO is giving the academic officer curriculum advice, like, no, it's like the worst referral possible, So it's like, no, I do not want to
Right.
hear from the computer
You
person,
could literally, you could imagine you have a champion customer who's like, you know what? I would love to introduce you to the chief academic officer. And you're like, let me stop you, Bob, because while I appreciate that, we're going to go in through the front door
As
because, if we come in through the basement, being carried by you, the IT person. Uh,
exactly, exactly. So look, I think you draw on your experience, and I think founders are probably more likely to be successful when the kind of sales motion they're setting out to do is similar to what they've done in the past, it succeeded, right? So if I had done another startup selling to, education CIOs, I would have had sort of like probably a cleaner path to get there than when you're kind of going out on your own. But when you're going out on your own, you need resources. I mean, founding sales is amazing, and everyone should read it. I read many of the early drafts. Modern Sales Pros, again, just having a community where people are just constantly kind of pinging through ideas and questions. You just kind of you learn a little bit by osmosis because when you're starting a company, you're really busy, so you don't have time to read that many books or sort of source every answer. But if every day in your email you're kind of listening to other people's questions and occasionally chiming in, I think it's a nice way to sort of gradually learn and so those were helpful resources.
So as you guys, I talked about your initial customer there that
Yeah,
was like kind of referred, and then you had your
yeah,
initial like district level
yeah.
customer. And did you guys evolve your pricing over time at all?
Yeah. So, it's interesting. When I was at Clever, we were a purely SaaS business. And as a SaaS business, essentially you're making up your pricing. In the pre-AI days, you had zero marginal cost, right? And so like the price was purely based on value. And in the early days, you have no idea what the value is, and you come up with some kind of calculator, but you really don't know. And so you sort of name a price, and I think you've given this advice many times, Pete, which is, you kind of experiment on prices to your early customers. You then will change the price, but don't change on your early customers. Like keep them, like doesn't
Right.
matter.
Yeah,
Like
grandfather.
keep them for referrals, exactly. And then you kind of keep on kind of like locking in that price, and it gets more and more specific. Um, in the AI world, it might be a little bit different. You might have some actual marginal costs, but it's probably not, terrible. Um, in the kind of business we were doing, service is a product, which, there's sort of a larger AI vision behind it. But at the beginning, it really is kind of service as a product. Like you have real marginal costs. But you don't know what that marginal cost is going in, right? Because you don't like you can build models, but well, what's the cost of this person who's going to scale to manage these people and the resources they'll need? And are we doing 1 day of training or 2 days of training? Like these decisions have big consequences and you don't know upfront. So, I think it's important to set, a price. I mean, we're in education, we're mission driven, so we're not trying to gouge the market in any sense. But you want to set a price that shows like there is real value behind this to confirm that people want to pay for value. And you just have to accept that the price is probably going to change over time in our model, as you better understand your marginal costs in a pure SaaS business as you sort of look to optimize your price.
Did you guys, so how did you just like set a price initially and then reserve the right to like modify that, or were you just very agile as you brought on increment, like as you sold an initial customer and then you saw what your delivery costs were? Because it sounds like you actually have kind of some staffing costs on your back
Yep.
end
Yep.
in order to deal with. And so
Yep.
then as you more kind of understood the dynamics of that delivery model, that then helped you update to, all right, well, I guess in the next sales conversation when they ask us what our pricing is, boy howdy, we better say 2x because we're taking a bath on our previous customer. And so were you just like you
Yeah,
knew
I'd say
because you had like your delivery costs were unclear that you had to be super 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 flexible as you
yeah,
sold incremental
I'd actually
customers.
say it might be a little bit more subtle than that. When we start with pricing, I think where you typically want to start, with a small business is, the simplest pricing possible, right? And so, our customers used to paying whatever they're buying, it's per student. It would be primarily how
Yes.
they think about cost per
Don't
student.
fight with them on that.
Exactly. So we're gonna sell it, sort of at the cost per student, and then everything's bundled in, and you intend, like, of course, you're gonna, put triple the customer success into those early customers because you want to make them really successful. Nonetheless, you've got this kind of like per student price. In our model, we provide like human feedback and coaching based on these recorded instructional sessions that these paraprofessionals and aides are delivering in the classroom. So we have, real marginal cost. We have a coaching staff that provides this coaching. What we discovered in the kind of the pure per student pricing is, a school district might say, great, we're going to deliver this to, 100 students. Okay, fair. And we're gonna have 50 people deliver the instructions. So each person will be working with 2 students. well, 50 people are delivering instruction each of 2 students. I'm now coaching them,
You're
weekly. I'm
coaching
coaching
50
these
people.
50 people, and it's
Oh
the
no.
most, inefficient use of resources ever because, that coaching is helping them teach 2 kids to read. And
Wait a minute. You're paying me for 100 students, but
right,
I'm upskilling 50 of your
right,
people. Shouldn't I
exactly.
just charge you on a per person I'm upskilling, but I buy all my stuff on a per student basis?
Precisely, precisely. And so,
How did you navigate
eventually,
that?
yeah. And well, I mean, look, eventually it was just, we found ourselves in a position where we were essentially like negotiating with our customers. Like we would essentially like kind of like sign a customer or, and then because again, it's a multi-level sale. So we would sign the district customer. Then we're going to principals and we're saying, no, I think you can serve these 20 people, these 20 students with 3 instructors instead of 4, instead of 5. And then you just kind of put your customer team in just this unenviable position of their very first interaction with their customers is like
Trading.
negotiating over ratios, and it's not the right thing. And so eventually, we needed to move to a model that kind of more reflects our costs, which I had always thought was a no-no. You price on value, not costs. But when you actually do have costs, like, you need to take cost into account, and then that ends up streamlining everything. Like that is better for the customers as well because then you meet with the principals and it's hey, the district is paid for this many staff, and so
As
that's not
agreed.
even a discussion. We're just like moving forward. So we now price on kind of staff and students, so it's a little bit more complicated. But again, we realized by the time we made the pricing change, we have a complex sale. So if you have complex pricing, like, if you're buying, I tell people, if you're buying, Oracle or something like that, you're not you're not looking for like a single line item price. Like every quote is going to be highly customized. And so if you're doing a complex sale, you can have, more subtle pricing in
And so as you guys were kind of iterating your pricing here, as you saw how it landed in the market, what have you, did you end up iterating your ideal customer profile at all? I mean, obviously, you already covered one of those where we started out selling to principals, and then we found that we were doing an enterprise sale in order to get $5,000, and that was silly. So then we started talking directly with the districts instead. So obviously that was one shift where you realized that the juice wasn't worth the squeeze, so you might as well try to take down the entire orchard to start, if you will. Um, what else did you guys? How else did you guys iterate?
it. We realized essentially that, every sale was sort of equally complex, like regardless of customer size. And so it just made sense to target not only districts as opposed to schools, but the largest districts. There's 13,000 districts in the United States. Top 500 of them are roughly half the students in the country. If I'm getting those numbers right. And so you start with we just realized, like, you could spend all this time selling a small district and they've got 3 elementary schools total, rather spend your time selling to larger school districts. Of course, if a smaller one comes inbound, wonderful. But
Yeah, so it turns out this is very much like the workday sales motion where the reality is that look, it's gonna be a slog regardless. So we're gonna go ahead and take down the highest commercial intensity, not because it's low effort, but because everything is high effort, more or less. So
precisely.
we might as well go after those folks. So, okay, interesting. So maybe you could kind of take folks through because when I think about EdTech go to market, I think about essentially my son's iPad that has all these little tiles of different apps, each of which is not like dramatically costly. And I know the folks at Muzella and some of the other and like Seesaw, what have you. A lot of these are kind of like lower ASPs or sometimes more velocity. This is the opposite,
Yes.
right? Intentionally. Maybe you can kind of take folks through what the sales motion looks like and like maybe how it started out, maybe not at the principal level, but what it initially looked like at the district level, and then how it changed, predicated on this realization that all of these are slogs. So
Yeah.
we might as well make sure that the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow is fairly substantial here.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's a great question. The sales motion is, yeah, it's a complex sale, and there's going to be kind of a complex sales motion, for that type of sale. it was funny. I actually drew on sort of when we got to this point, I drew on some previous experience, which we hadn't gone through in my background. But after leaving Clever, the VP of engineering and I teamed up on a kind of new startup. We went through YC. It was a nonprofit actually, but we built open source voting machines called Voting Works, which is it's doing great today. And I was, I figured, I had done, I'd done education sales, so I'd be, sort of state, local, sounded fine to me. In the voting machine market, the voting machine market is the wildest market there is, and it is wild in sort of a like impossible. It's like scaling the hardest cliff, because in the voting machine market, basically no one buys, like within a state, no one buys voting machines for a period of basically between like 10 and 20 years while their current voting machines just kind of are in use and sit. And then at some point the state decides, okay, we're going to fund purchase new voting machines, and suddenly there's a feeding frenzy in the state, and it's like it's the only time to sell voting machines for like the next 20 years. Now voting machines, the kind of local registrars, or the folks who manage voting within the county or within the kind of voting district, they have like fairly close customer relationships with their voting machine vendor, because they're like, if there's a problem, like some vote flipped or whatever it is, it's like, these are the people who, are going to come to the rescue, and okay, let's rerun that ballot through the machine and show that nothing actually flipped, like the machine just froze, and sort of solve all those problems. And so those relationships are basically impenetrable, right? Someone's been working with someone for 20 years. Now there's the feeding frenzy. Am I going to choose the person who have a trusting relationship with for 20 years, or some new vendor who has some neat feature? No, I'm going to go with my trusted relationship. So I sort of brought that back to education. I said, look, people have been selling reading solutions to districts for literally 50 years. It's not a feeding frenzy in the same way. It's district-driven decisions, not state kind of funding opportunities, although it is in some cases. But it's the relationships that matter. It's the trust that matters, because how do you really distinguish one product from another? It's really hard. And so what I did early on is I had a former contact, a friend who was friends with a woman who had started a company, which we'd encountered at Clever. And so at Clever, our business model was unusual in that we would sell to the vendors into education, and then they would kind of distribute our solution across the school districts they were in. Well, one of the most prolific distributors of Clever in the Southeast was an assessment company that none of us had really ever encountered or heard of before, but they had customer relationships across the Southeast. And so they were doing something really well. We didn't know exactly what, but they were
They're
doing something
selling
great.
well.
Selling well, absolutely. And they had a great product. And so it just happened when we were starting once, I met the CEO of that company. They'd gotten acquired, and she said that she was actually a former kindergarten teacher and deeply believed in this and wanted to get involved. And so it was just happenstance and really good luck and really good timing. But she had those relationships, and so I thought back to this voting experience where people buy from the folks that they trust, and so that was our initial channel. Essentially, was her relationships.
I think it's funny because we all, as entrepreneurs, and solve this, usually it's new, which is why you have to consider something anew. And if that is the case, then this person should uh, look at it and say, hey, there's an opportunity to do something better here. And all of a sudden, like, poof, good things happen. And so and I think that that is the case for the most part, with the exception of these high criticality situations where there's a lot of risk at play, or deep customer relationships. And so usually I guide against the notion of, oh, you should hire salespeople for their Rolodexes. No, you shouldn't. That's what Zoom Info is for, or that's what LinkedIn Sales Navigator is for. That's what Apollo is for. Except in the scenario where they are the thing that is in the Rolodex is not the contact information, but the trust, the relationship. This person is not going to hose me. The multi-round game-ness associated with it.
100%. And just to kind of put even a finer point on that, one thing, I mean, education is hard for many reasons. One thing that makes K-12 so hard is that the best way to sell in a K-12 is through customer referrals, right? Someone's used your product, they love it, and they're going to refer to someone else. Well, it takes, normally if you sell into a district, they pilot at the beginning. So it's like a very small sample, and then it takes a year until you get results. By the time that like that customer might even refer someone else, like that year's gone by because like to get results, which means the next like selling year is already over. So so it's sort of like 2 years in, like in the best circumstance until you get your first referral. And so if you're in that situation, you either say, okay, I'm going to just do this myself, and it is going to be, our exponential curve is going to start really, really, really flat, for many years,
For a
which is
long
pretty
time.
painful, or we're going to speed it up at the beginning because we need to sort of
Right. Some sort of
inject trust into
some sort of
the
like bootstrap mechanism.
exactly.
Um, so let's actually talk about both of those things, because one of the things I ask founders to think about is compelling events in their go-to-market, because everyone always has problems. Um, and the question is like, when does the problem that you address become the tippy top one to be solved by your customer in question? And then, so one, identifying that, but then the other thing is that even if you can identify that and you can get in contact with them, and if they don't trust you, then like, what was the purpose of like, okay, cool, we identified this compelling event that some other vendor is going to be able to execute on or what have you. So maybe we can talk a little bit first about compelling events, and kind of if there are compelling events that you guys were able to identify, and then we can kind of talk about, okay, cool, executing against those using those referrals, or maybe those, and
No,
actually maybe they're parallel paths.
no, it's a great question. Look, I mean, in education, specifically in tutoring, there was a compelling event, which was the federal government spending hundreds of billions of dollars, injecting hundreds of billions of dollars into K-12 education, sort of during and immediately after the COVID pandemic. That was the compelling event. Districts had more money than they had ever had before. And lots of companies sort of took advantage of that compelling event, some with good intentions, some maybe with slightly less good intentions. But it was very hard to stand out in that environment, right? Because you're brand new, someone else has been doing this for 5 or 10 years, and so the compelling event was actually, it was like harder. If a district was having an RFP because this compelling event, it was like a worse time to sell to them, because someone bigger was going to sort of make a bigger splash. We basically had to figure out how to create our own compelling event. And it was not obvious how to do that. Uh, but I think, we did something that, typically happens in founder-led sales, which is that you just go back to like, how did you get your first customer? How did you get your second customer? Like, what was the compelling event there? And can you replicate that and scale it? Because it worked once, like maybe it could work again. Well, for our second customer, I mentioned, the first was a school that was referred by a friend, basically. Our second customer, we were in an interesting position where a large school district was interested, like separately from us, in working with kind of a premier research institution to study things within the school district. And we were also connected to a premier research institution, and so we said, hey, what if we bring the researchers into the school district to study our program? Like that would be a neat kind of marriage of like everyone's interests, and we kind of bring everyone together. And that really got us, running a randomized control trial with, sort of premier researchers in the school district, got us into that first school district. We then realized afterwards, wait a second, like
You
that
can
was the
replicate
compelling
this.
event. Like participating in research is very different from just the ordinary email traffic that school district leaders get, which is, hey, you want to pilot my thing, you want to pilot my thing, you want to do this. Look at the results we had over here. It's like, no. We want to work with top researchers to really kind of prove whether a certain approach works. And so we recreated that compelling event. And we, ran a study, in year one, we ran a study, but then in year two, we, didn't just invite one district, we invited, lots of districts. And we're now about to run our kind of third large research trial. And we invited all of the top 500 districts. And
Weird.
so, yeah, and so the compelling event was to participate in this kind of premier research trial, which featured us.
I think that's an amazing hack. I love it. It's absolutely fantastic. So I think there's a couple generalizable callouts there. One, yes, your customers should have a desire to solve the business problem that they're responsible for. In you guys' case, that would be improving reading scores. Like there is a tactical metrical thing that they're supposed to raise reading scores, in these standardized tests. Great. They should want to make their staff better. But humans are humans, and there's always the what's in it for me. And so being able to put a little feather in your cap saying, well, actually, I spearheaded this approach in my district, and we had these outcomes, and and I participated in this research paper, obviously is going to be something that is individually compelling to a chief academic officer or what have you. And so actually a friend who I kind of do sales coaching for their company has this great turn of phrase where might be secondhand. In sales and enterprise sales, we're in the business of selling promotions. And so in this case, the individual is going to get promoted, maybe not but like in a metaphorical sense. Yes, if they potentially, raise scores, like reading scores or what have you across the board in their in their district, sure. But also if they could say, and hey, look, I'm a co-author on this paper. I mean, don't underestimate those sort of things. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is that you can kind of create these content things that kind of go alongside your solution. There's like a variety of ways of like kind of figuring out like the bundle alongside that. I'm not thinking about many others off the top of my head, but if you can kind of think about like the two things and how like the complementarity of it, and like maybe this is the easier thing to get in there. Like in this case, like the research thing was the easier thing to get in, and it was the Trojan horse on which the reading curriculum, right, or the reading human capital upskilling curriculum was like the actual payload to get in. That can be a clever thing. You see that fairly good. There's other ways that organizations sometimes do this, like doing an assessment. Like, hey, we can do a health check for you,
Yeah.
right? Or you can lead with a friend of mine, this woman Jen Abel, who's a phenomenal Twitter follow. She talks about how professional services can be, and maybe just like a statement of work to do something, right? In this case, you guys were doing research, but you could imagine it could have been like an assessment or what have you that is a one-off thing that is not actually technology, that could be the initial transaction, and the technology is like pulled along with it and then maybe sticks around afterwards. What a clever hack. Good job, Matt. I'm very
I
impressed.
appreciate you saying that. And I also think obviously at the end of the day, like the authenticity of that compelling event to what you're actually selling and what you actually do
Of course.
matters, right? And so, you might come up with a hack where, you're able to, gather people for free food in some venue or something, and it works, and clever. I mean, we came up with lots of really interesting, approaches that were often quite successful. But I think, in this case, when you really kind of reach out to someone about, you kind of create a compelling event, but that's really germane to what you're actually doing, it resonates in a way that just kind of like a free offer of this just, sounds like noise.
Well, like I need another Starbucks gift card, like I need another hole in my head. Although in the case maybe you're selling to teachers, it might be, those sort of things that we in the technology industry might take for granted might actually land. Okay. Well, so you had mentioned customer referrals and how I think what we're talking about here is trust.
Yeah.
Right. And so one version of trust is a seller that you've worked with before, maybe in another capacity, that can kind of be like, can inject this trust here. Another kind of like transitive property of trusted vendor can come through a referral or customer referral. I feel that especially in an age where email deliverability is a disaster, and even if you're delivering your emails, people's inboxes are overflowing, especially with like AI SDR stuff or what have you, an authentic customer referral can be very compelling. But But of course, the challenge is that they're not super scalable just yet. I haven't seen kind of software or kind of processes by which to scale them up. So one, maybe you can kind of talk about why they were so compelling. I think it's probably pretty obvious in a high trust, kind of high criticality, high average selling price environment, why that's the case. But kind of two, maybe you can talk about if you've done much around systematizing or kind of like levering that at all. And maybe you haven't, but it would
Yeah.
be cool if you
No,
did.
it's a great question. I mean, look, we would be on fire if we, if we were able to systematize that in the way that we want. Point I made earlier, and again, this is maybe more specific to education, where, it's minimum a year to see ROI, and potentially years if you want to study like long-term outcomes for kids. There's just not, it's not like, oh, I implemented this thing and I saved X dollars in 6 weeks or whatever, and now I'm just going to start advertising it to all my friends. For us, it's years. And so if you're in a kind of, if you're in an environment where referrals are probably going to be, your most important channel, but referrals are going to take years, how do you speed that up? You got to plant lots of seeds, right? And
Yeah,
so it's just like,
got to start
how
now.
exactly, how can I get as many big districts in as many different states as possible? Because folks are going to look to, well, who's doing what in my own state? So I'm going to as many districts in these states, and just plant that seed and invest everything in that seed, knowing
Getting
that
them
if that
successful.
flowers, it's going to work kind of in that location. So you're basically like prepping the soil for future referrals, even if it's going to be years until kind of those first referrals come. Which again, this is a challenging sector, and I'm
And,
I
and then
don't
I
want to
think
minimize
there's
that.
another thing there too, is when people think about like territory management or prioritization of their total addressable market, if what we're saying here is, look, the critical path, the way that you're going to get to these organizations is going to be through a customer referral. It just is what it is, right? Because of the high ASP, like, or through a trusted seller. Then once, if we have somebody who is a raving success story in a region, then once they are a raving success story in that region, guess what we're going to do? We're going to get all the like forget like, oh, let's go prospect into Florida. We are doing all of Ohio. Why are we doing all of Ohio? We're doing all of Ohio because this district right here got to wild success, and we are going to ignore everybody else to a certain extent and just focus on getting in front of every single district in Ohio. Um, I like that. What when it came to like a channel that didn't work at all, what just did what didn't
Yeah,
work?
yeah. No, there were two, two that didn't work at all for us. And again, obviously, for everyone it's different. One, I mean, so again, initially I mentioned sending, kind of a cold email to every principal in America. Got, very high open rates at first, until I wasn't using any email deliverability tools, and then it just like, I mean, the emails just stopped getting delivered, and
So
that
so it
was,
sounds
yeah,
like you injured your domain, your
yes,
deliverability on your domain, but that's remediatable by doing incremental domains or what have you.
yes.
Like, sounds like the open rates were good. Were the reply rates were
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
okay?
Again, that was a long time ago, and that was the principle, so I don't have like numbers off the top of my head. But the replies, yeah, no, I mean the replies felt strong. But just subsequent attempts at and then it's like a year goes by, another year goes by. Subsequent attempts at cold email, even with a little bit more focus on deliverability and multiple domains and that type of thing, and warming and everything. Was just really hard. School districts, I mean, they are just getting these emails by the dozen
And
every
this was
single day.
targeting the chief academic officers.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Targeting, and these are not like AI written emails, and they're not like sent out to, 10,000 people at once. It's like personally written emails, but cold, but going out to folks. And again, they're just getting so many personal emails every day, that it just, it just didn't go anywhere.
So
Um,
like the chief academic officer at these districts kind of has a similar situation to like a chief information security officer, like the CISO in enterprise sales is the budget holder who is just like completely overrun
Yeah,
by
100%,
vendors all over them, right? And I
100%.
and I think the funny thing about this is a little bit of a tautology here, insofar as it turns out that the people who have lots of budget will probably have lots of vendors seeking that budget,
Yep,
right? And
yep,
and so it's like a juice worth the squeeze sort of situation yet again. And so it's probably not surprising that what I've heard, that one of the things that works really well in at least enterprise CISO go to market is relationships and Rolodexes and what have you. Like a person that I worked with at the previous generation of endpoint security now is is a sales representative, like a representative of the organization at this new category of endpoint, endpoint security or endpoint endpoint security. And so I will take his meeting because we worked together previously or what have you. And it sounds like that's kind of a similar situation here where anything that is cold, right? Cold email, cold calling, or what have you, is in a sea of other things because these folks have large budgets that they're able to disperse like a CISO. And instead the route around that is a very relationship driven go to market or relationship driven sale, not dissimilar to the kind of the enterprise security market.
yeah.
Interesting.
And I would, I would even say, because I doubted. I mean, look, I doubted ourselves. I said, oh, like maybe we're just not doing cold email the right way,
Yeah,
or
no, probably.
everyone says, oh, email's impossible. You got to call these folks. And I was like, well, maybe we're not, good enough at calling. So we even, hired a like outsourced firm, some SDRs basically, fully focused on education, to make these calls, and they made no more progress than I did without them. And it was just like these folks are just getting the exact problem you described. They're just getting mobbed with things all day long. And so what we discovered was going back to the compelling, like, so cold email generally not working. Cold calling not working. You're just fighting against just like thousands and thousands of other folks doing the same thing. And so we generated the compelling event with the sort of selective invitation for the research trial, but we still have to get that event out to people. Like, just the fact that we have a
Yeah,
cool,
exactly.
compelling event that works, like, how's anyone going to hear about it? We're not going to have a Super Bowl commercial. And so I did find an email deliverability service I really liked, called Lightmeter. I don't know if you've worked with them. I think they're YC. But I'd worked with another one previously where they were kind of putting pixel tracking into emails to check on deliverability. And then I talked to someone else and they were like, well, pixel tracking itself kills deliverability. And I'm like, this is just, it's just, it is wrong every which way. But Lightmeter, I was very pleased with, and, they basically they do kind of all the automation around, spinning up all the different email boxes and sending out and monitoring, what's happening with the different boxes. And so when we had the right compelling event with, right deliverability infrastructure, and they did a great job, you know, and a very, very clean contact list. We reached out to the top 500 districts and we got, a 10% reply rate, like 10% like positive, uh, um, interested reply, not sort of like stop emailing me. And so that was like, that's
That's
huge.
it.
That is the, like, that's it, right? Because that's like basically 10% of our target market responded that they wanted to learn more. And
Yeah,
so,
totally.
and
And
those are the
and I
seeds that
think
then convert.
I think there's the offer, which is what you guys are describing, the offer of like, hey, come participate, like a highly resonant offer. Come participate in this research. Why, yes, I would love to be a co-author on this paper that I can put on my resume. I'm so glad you're in my inbox. And then the second piece of it might be, no, well, unfortunately, even if you have a good offer, being one of 100 emails that day is maybe not great. So that offer delivered by somebody who has a good relationship, like the former enterprise seller who's sold to all those districts before, or your case, the founder of this other EdTech company. Those two things together, right? So like an offer that really hits, and then someone who will get the offer read, right, or get
Yeah,
the
I would
offer
say
considered.
someone, or just really great deliverability infrastructure that is primed for that compelling event. I think those are the two that can really work, and
Yeah,
we've had success with both.
and there's other mechanisms. This is one of the things that I would kind of talk with folks about is using other vectors as well. Like in this presentation that I give around kind of founder-led sales basics, I describe all of the like verbs, right? All the actions that you can take to do selling and what we're talking about prospecting. So as an example, if you only have 500 accounts and you know each one is worth $100,000 or $200,000, you can send a FedEx envelope, right? You can send a candygram.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? We're not talking about, this is not Rippling. This is not Zenefits, right? This is not Seesaw, right? Where we have like a, 1K average selling price or what have you. In that scenario, if you have an offer, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get someone to read it, right? To consider it, to get the mind virus into their brain. So they go, oh, okay. Yeah, actually that is kind of interesting there. So you should consider these things, that there are other vectors by which you can deliver words and images to a counterparty for them to kind of consider. Um, let's change gears a little bit here and talk about customer success. So, what was particularly important for customer success when you were starting out? I mean, it sounds like in these large organizations, there's a lot of change management. Um, so I imagine being very high touch is important. What did you find that was most important there?
Yeah, I mean, what was, what's sort of nice about our model and makes it well aligned with, kind of a complex enterprise sale is just that, like, our business is very high touch. We are literally providing coaching to these, frontline employees in schools to help them improve their reading tutoring. But we're also working with the school leadership to schedule, the sessions and the coaching sessions and all the instruction, and there's logistics and which space is it happening in and who's doing it, and oh, this kid's out for a day, and this paraprofessional is leaving and who's going to take their place. And so there's so much back and forth, and that is really, I mean, that's great in an enterprise sales environment, right? Because it's like once you go deep, you want
Touching
to
a
really
lot of
work
people.
in a very collaborative way with your customers. So that was kind of built into our model from the beginning, not to try and increase sales, but just simply because that's what we needed to do to deliver the value that we were trying to deliver. And so yeah, so we were high touch from day one. We needed to do some learning about, well, if the district is your buyer and you are high touch with the principals, that might not be good enough. Like, you also need to be high touch with the district, because just having principals who love you, right, does not mean that
Mhm.
the district is gonna
Oh, you need to
sign for a
be
second year. So
you need to be high touch with the budget holder. Or as
exactly.
I'm going to quote my friend Jen again, success in enterprise sales, or at least from a NRR standpoint, derives from making the budget holder the user,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
right? If your budget holder is logging in every day, it's good.
Totally, totally. And so, so we had, so our kind of success arm really focuses much more on the individual school buildings, but we needed, also really strong relationship management on the account side for sure.
Yeah. And then also, I think one of the benefits of it, folks might look at this and say, oh man, that's like, laborious and time consuming and costly from a customer success standpoint. But these are also assuming that your product fits the market and people really enjoy it. These are future customers that then maybe teachers probably don't move between districts a lot, but I can imagine in this situation that maybe the paraprofessionals do. And so to the extent that you can then track those folks, right? So
100%.
a friend of mine runs a company called User Gems that does kind of like tracking. Probably hard for teachers because they don't, I imagine they probably don't have the best LinkedIn profiles in the world, but tracking as your users go to other places and then
Yes.
jumping on them over there can be a very powerful thing
No,
if and only if you start.
superintendent's tenure in a district might be 2 or 3 years. Chief academic officer might be a few years. So there, you
Oh,
have a
interesting.
strong relationship in one district, and boom, there's your, mini virality into the next district and the next and next. So it's,
That's interesting.
also
So the teachers don't move around a lot, but the superintendents and the chief academic officers do.
correct,
Fascinating.
correct. Yeah, so that's who's gonna move around, and that's how these companies grow. But this is all measured in years, right? And so it's just why this is just it's a challenging sector, but it's a very fulfilling sector, a very mission-driven sector, and a very sticky sector. Like, if you can pull it off, you can build a great business, because anyone else who's going to start up has to climb those same walls. It's going to take them, the same years or a decade to do. So you can build a great business, but it's it's a marathon. It's not a sprint.
There's usually an inverse relationship between deal cycle and win rate and
Yeah.
NRR. So the longer
Yeah.
your deal cycle, the lower your win rate, right? So essentially, like the harder it is to get in, frequently the harder it is for them for you to get back out again because other people can't get in. And you see this in GovTech as well. What like OpenGov kind of had this early on. And then this is why oftentimes these businesses over time, they have a footprint in a given customer and then they start just adding incremental like jobs to be done. So like a great example of this is this GovTech roll-up company called Granicus. I forget if they're owned by Vista or Thoma Bravo or what have you, but you get in, you get super embedded, you get very sticky, you get into workflow, et cetera, and then you start adding kind of incremental things. And so maybe, I don't know, who knows? Maybe that's the future with Once is we're doing upskilling with respect to reading, and then of course maybe we do upskilling with respect to XYZ for like a different set of audiences or what have you, and thereby add another 30% to our contract value or what have you. Who knows? We're going to solve the problem first of knocking down all 500 of these
Exactly.
these districts first. What maybe you can tell everyone here what your early sales stack looked like. Obviously, you talked about like email deliverability and multiple inbox kind of management and warming, and that was what was it? Light what?
For a specific highly successful campaign, we used Light Meter is called.
Light meter. And
Yeah.
so like that's fine, but like
Yeah.
obviously that's a kind of tangential thing. What else did you
Sure.
use as your early
I mean,
sales stack?
yeah, I mean, we have not done a ton of automation. We've used Close as our CRM, which at our stage just just great. And that's worked well. What I'd say the biggest sort of something that we were talking about customer success, and we talked about like sort of being high touch and how that was effective. I think one of the challenging aspects in customer success, especially high touch customer success, is aligning it internally within the company and kind of driving transparency around high touch customer success, right? Because if your customer success motion looks like, okay, we have a quarterly business review with a customer, or we have even a monthly meeting with a customer, you can track that. You can say, okay, where's the slide deck and where's the, this, and everyone can kind of, you can check the box and say, okay, I did this thing. Sometimes that can feel like a lot of paperwork, but,
Hmm.
nonetheless, it can be tracked. But when you really have like a kind of consultative relationship, not quite forward deployed engineer, but a strongly consultative relationship, it's all the interstitial stuff that really drives that interaction, right? It's the text messages back and forth, some of which are, about people's personal lives and some of which are about the product or the
Right.
customer. It's, and that stuff is really important. And so, but can be a little bit challenging sometimes to track. And so when you look at it from the outside, a salesperson says, well, I don't see that many like quarterly business decks. Does that mean we're not helping this customer? It's like, no, I've like communicated with this customer 50 times in the last month, and it's like, so finding ways to kind of instrument that. And I think we've done an okay job in Close with that. But we could do, we could do, we could do even better. And obviously we could build, more sophisticated sales engineering and, really.
Um, how many customers did you end up closing before your first sales hire? Because I think I was unaware of Once's ASP coming into this conversation. For whatever reason, I thought it was like your prototypical kind of like low,
Yeah.
five figure or what have you. And so the problem, of course, when you're a founder doing founder-led sales is when you have these high ASP customers with long deal cycles, you really can't close that many before you have to hire another sales rep, or else you're just gonna have a company that like never grows.
Exactly.
And so how many did you end up kind of closing yourself before you brought on Cindy, I think it
Yeah.
was.
Yeah. We had six. We had six customers. Most of them were, not like not low ASPs, but not not enormous either. These were not sort of like big six-figure ASPs. But we had, six customers we had sort of acquired through a variety of channels. But it just quickly became clear that if we wanted yeah, if we wanted to scale trust, there was one way to scale trust, and that was to bring on someone who came with trust.
That's really fascinating because in founder-led selling, oftentimes the founder is the portable reputation and trust because they have such subject matter expertise in the space.
Yeah.
And so the interesting thing here being that even though you do have subject matter expertise in this, the because the audience, because the buyer, they're very skeptical of that because they have lots of people being subject matter expertise, they're subject matter experts in their inbox. So you had to prove the high friction, high skepticism sales motion initially, and then identified that the key constraint here was trust. And so I suppose maybe like one
No,
way of solving that was Cindy, which is great.
right.
And like that
Yeah.
was one.
Right.
Another way would be, and I think actually we were talking about this in the founder-led sales community salon the other night around thought leadership and kind of like content on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And by content on LinkedIn, I mean there's like kind of like stupid shit posting content on
Right.
LinkedIn, and then
Of
there's like
course.
actual like, hey, like I'm gonna write a book on this
Yeah.
thing, and it's gonna be good, and we're gonna distribute it out, and lots of people are gonna get it. One way you can do this is to ramp your own subject matter, sorry, the own perception of subject matter
Yeah.
expertise, like ramp your own credibility, which kind of hard to do that quickly. Maybe you can. Maybe there's mechanisms by which you do
Yeah.
that. Like Sam from Mastra has done a very good job of that using through distributing his book Principles of AI Agents. But um but that's interesting. Like essentially you pushed the rock uphill, closed 6 customers, identified the constraint, which was
Yeah.
trust,
Yeah.
right? And like in this specific market, trust was extraordinarily important, probably like the enterprise security one
Yeah.
as well. And so even if you were super expert, and you
Yeah.
are, and you're obviously a very bright guy and can learn things very quickly, the counterparty did not give you credit for that unless it showed up as Cindy, right?
Precisely.
Or what
And,
have
and,
you.
and it was
That's
interesting.
fascinating.
Yeah, no, there was a moment actually that I thought was very illustrative of this, which is an early call with a very large district, would have been our biggest district at the time. And, one of our first sales calls. And we were talking about the product. And at one point they asked, what was our point of view on authentic reading? And normally, when I'm in conversations or sales, generally, like, I don't like to just say, yeah, to kind of technical term. If it's like a term of art, I want to be like, what, like, what do you think of as authentic reading? I kind of, tell me more about this. But, and I'd say 70% of the time, like that builds trust, right? Because you're really learning and like you're really engaged. And maybe we have different understandings of authentic reading. Maybe it's not a technical term. In any case, it is a technical term. And by asking that question, they were like, oh, no, we're not even gonna have this conversation. Like, this is such an
This
important,
meeting is
like,
over.
exactly,
Right.
like,
Like there was a
uh,
very critical
right,
shibboleth
right,
that just went straight over your head. And they
totally,
were like,
totally,
get
totally.
out.
Totally. And it's like, and the shibboleth was
Ouch.
authentic reading, right? I mean, it's like not like, it's not like highly technical. It's like authentic reading, but in the specific reading context, like that does mean something. And so I just, at that moment, I just realized like, this is not, this is, I mean, of course I can talk, about authentic reading, but this is something where like, there's going to be a different level of trust. The fact that I've, sold a lot of, school IT is not going to kind of build that
Affordable.
level of trust.
That's
But there are
yeah.
people who can do it.
Yeah. I think that I'm part of like in founder-led sales, the whole idea is like you're figuring out the path through the forest, or you're figuring out the recipe. And if it turns out that there is a constraint, an insuperable constraint, which is the words have to come out of the mouth of someone that this person has known for 10 years. And you actually see this in other regions often. Like this is very common in East Asian sales. So organizations that then go to market in like Japan or China, you see this. Also kind of like MENA, like
Yeah.
Middle Eastern, like
And and and
North
and and,
Africa.
and to clarify, I'm not arguing that in education, I've not sold in those specific geographies. In those geographies or in certain geographies, potentially you always need like that level of trust. It's like it's an antecedent almost to the product itself. Education it's not that you can never have a more junior seller, with a little bit less kind of built-in trust selling something or talking about a product, but you need those customer proof points first. So it's a chicken egg problem where it's like, how do you get to customer proof points? Well, you need trust to get to the proof points that build the trust. Well, then again, how do you bootstrap
And
that trust?
and it's like a scoring algorithm too, where it's like a whole mix of customer proof points crossed with high, like the level of criticality and the size of the transaction. The fact that you guys are addressing these top 500 accounts, maybe if you were addressing the next 500 accounts, the level of trust might be dialed down, or the trust required might be dialed down a little bit, but it still requires all the cat herding and wrangling, what have you. So we might as well go to the top. And so going to the top means that we need to have this like trust importation or what have you. Um, what and kind of like in closing, I think I would love to kind of just close off on some of the sales hire. I know that you've only hired a couple of sellers or what have you. And a big component of what's interesting here is, I want to know about hiring and onboarding, hear about hiring and onboarding and what have you. But one of the biggest reasons why you were hiring these people is for their relationships where they can open the door and actually get an audience and what have you. That obviously doesn't take onboarding because like they're showing up with that capacity. What were the other things that were super important for you to get right to make the most out of that kind of imported reputation or imported trust?
Yeah. Well, I think one thing that's interesting specifically, I think would kind of relate to your world is that, if you bring in folks with more established relationships, they probably have more experience selling on like more legacy, sort of sales systems and sales software, and
Ah,
following more legacy practices, you know, where, Atrium and kind of you stand out is figuring out, how do you innovate most rapidly and iterate most rapidly on sales practices. Well, you have a catch-22 when you're starting by bringing on more senior folks, which is you don't know your right sales process, right? Like even if you were a genius at all the different CRMs, like you don't know what fields you actually should track. Like you don't have a repeatable sales motion yet. And so you're sort of caught between a rock and a hard place, which is, you're building a team or an initial team of people who have established practices, but they might not be the most modern practices, but those are the practices that worked for them previously. You don't have your own modern practices yet because you don't understand your own sale. And so you end
yes.
up kind of like adopting legacy practices. And so you lose control, a little bit of control over your sales motion. And I think
We're going to
that's,
go ahead and bring in these senior folks that have lots of high trust. They have an expectation that we're going to do outbound via carrier pigeon, and we're going to use the Stone Tablet CRM.
yeah, I mean, look, I love all the people that we've worked with, and I would never want to put anyone down, but I think in a
Well, I think
yeah,
that's
yeah,
totally fair, and there's a management component
yeah,
to that as well,
yeah, yeah,
right? Where we see this with Atrium's customers all the time. You know, these enterprise sellers who they build their relationship over the time. They're maybe in their late 30s, they're maybe in their 40s, maybe in their 50s, right? And so they have an expectation around how they're going to be managed
yeah,
as
exactly.
as well. Like I've been doing this for XYZ number of years. Like I've closed more ARR personally than any of your companies have ever earned. So, who are you to say XYZ? And like you have to navigate those things. So like not only does it show up in systems things and kind of processes like you're talking about, it can show up in kind of managerial things and kind of like coaching and
Yeah,
you have to
and
kind of like pick your battles there.
and even skepticism of the lack of marketing at the company, right? Or sort of the lack of like all the ways that a startup does not look like already a large company when it's just at the beginning. So I think there's kind of complexities to navigating that, and if you've been through it and earned some scars, then are probably better prepared to do it a second time. But if you're going through it the first time, it is hard to kind of it's hard to iterate and build a modern sales system if you can't yourself be the trusted seller from day one. So it's not to say it's an impossible problem. It's just added
I think
complexity. Yeah,
Yeah, I think there's just trade-offs here as
yeah,
well, where if it is truly the case where you have to import reputation, the shape of your market, the physics of your go-to-market, make it such that you have to import reputation, which is typically encapsulated in these more senior and as a result, kind of like more tenured and more used to legacy systems or legacy processes or what have you, you have a choice. You can either do that or you can figure out some sort of other approach. And that might be, like we were saying earlier, somehow spiking your own reputation in some sort of capacity through publication or speaking or what have you. Good example, this is a buddy of mine, Edith Harbaugh, who is the founder of Launch Darkly. Um, she's super smart and awesome herself, but she became the queen of feature flags through starting Launch Darkly, not on like just accident, but because she spoke at any conference everywhere. Like she lived on a plane for 2 years in order to ramp her reputation as the queen of feature flags. So that's one way you could do that.
100%.
Another way is through kind of imported reputation, like we were talking about earlier, but each has their own kind of like trade-offs associated with it. Well, in kind of closing, I mean, this is super fantastic. High ASP ed tech is something you don't, at least I haven't heard a lot about. I'm sure it exists, but one of the things that I love to do is I get to learn about these different go-to-market motions and kind of the puzzles because they're just puzzles, right? They're the way that we make our way through the market in order to have supply meet eager demand. And if you were to kind of give a takeaway, kind of your most important takeaway to folks who are in ed tech, in high ASP, or maybe in high ASP ed tech, what was kind of your parting shot there?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think that, high SP ed tech or high ASP, sort of education sales, um, implies like high value, right? You are delivering something with a lot of value. It's not just all those little buttons on the screen you talked about before, with each one. I don't know, maybe it's good, maybe it's not, like, doesn't really matter sort of in
But there's a
aggregate.
lot of them, right?
Right, right,
Yeah.
right, right. There's a lot of them. If you're doing the opposite approach, like your stuff better work. And so, we've talked about, we spent I think a lot of time without using the word friction, talking about friction and, sales complexity and how hard this is and how, it takes 2 years to get to validation and then another year for someone to refer you. And now you're like years and years in, and how do we accelerate and go faster? I think the parting shot is just that, you know, if you're working in a complex space like this, like there is some benefit, not to moving slowly in the sense that you're trying to slow things down, but like that slowness allows you to do some more product refinement than would happen earlier in kind of a higher velocity sales motion. And that ultimately you need that product refinement to build the thing that's valuable enough that you've got your high ASP sale. So I think that had we scaled to hundreds of customers in year one or year two, like we would have broken, like that actually would have broken us. Like what we're doing wouldn't have worked in that scenario. But ideally, you learn in the early years, and then AI is changing things, right? And so if you can figure out a complex problem that a customer has and a way to solve it, even if it's slow and high touch and importing trust and all these hard things at the beginning, if you can solve it and solve it repeatedly and then begin to layer in some AI, you can build, a scalable product, and there's real opportunity there. So it's, it takes time, but it's an exciting journey.
I love it. Well, Matt, thank you very much for taking the time to hang out with us today. And, I'll see you soon.
Sounds good.